I'm pleased to be joined today with Jim Morris, Vice Chairman of the Indiana Pacers Sports and Entertainment. And Jim, you and I have known each other for quite some time and know all of the great positions and work that you've done in our city over many years. You've held positions, I know, with chief of staff for then Mayor Richard Lugar. You've been president of the Lilly Endowment. You've served at the Indianapolis Water Company. I know you've done work internationally with the United Nations on food security around the world. And you've just been an incredible participant over a number of decades in the growth and the strategies to grow the city of Indianapolis and the state of Indiana. And I'm just so happy to spend some time with you today talking about some of that work. The focus of our discussion today is about the development and the history of the sports strategy that was developed years ago, I know under your guidance and leadership, and how that sports strategy fits into today's city's efforts on economic development and the state's efforts on economic development as well. So I'm going to start, Jim, with a question that might take you back a little bit to the early days and some of that decision making for the actual sports strategy that came about, and that is what was your position at the time the sports strategy was developed, thought about, and began the early days of the implementation of that strategy?
Thank you, Nate. Truly an honor and a pleasure to be with you this morning. Admire the IBJ so much and grateful for its positive, optimistic coverage of our city and our state. So important. I worked with Dick Lugar for 6 years, and then I was the Lilly Endowment for 16 years. And during that time, the city was working very hard to figure out how to be competitive, how to be a place where the brightest young people in the world would want to come here to work free or to work at IUP or medical school, where investment capital would come, where new jobs would come, and the best and the brightest would want to be a part of Indianapolis. And initially, Unigov was a fundamental piece of this that brought the city and the county boundaries into one community. Overnight, we went from being the 30th largest city in America to being the 9th largest city in America. Now, it's a bit of a fiction, but nevertheless, when the list of the top 10 cities in the United States was put together, we were honored, and right between Baltimore and San Diego. So an enormous step forward. Dick Lugar had sort of the overall perspective. My perspective was great cities have exciting, dynamic downtowns, have great universities, and are places that care in unusual ways about the future of opportunities for their children. And there were a lot of things that we had to work on that would address those issues. But Dick Lugar loved to spend time with young people. He, in the summertime, always ran with kids at the Tech High School track. But the building of Market Square Arena was a major step forward for the city. And the Pacers had been playing at the Coliseum at the State Fairgrounds, but they needed a better place to play and needed to be located in the heart of the city where it belonged to everyone. Dick Lugar loved the Indiana High School basketball tournament. And it was a fact that the high school tournament, Hinkle was this magnificent place, but it was not big enough. And the tournament was being played in Bloomington and West Lafayette. And as great as those venues are and exciting as IU and Purdue would be, it killed Dick Lugar not to have the championship of the Indiana High School basketball tournament for both boys and girls, which in the end, you could make the case it's the largest sporting event in the world. So we built Market Square Arena to keep the high school tournament in the heart of the state capitol, to give the Pacers a place to play and a place where, you know, more people come together at that time than any place else in the state. So I had that focus coming from the Lugar years, and the Market Square investment transformed Indianapolis, the downtown, in a dozen ways. At the endowment had an enormous commitment to the well-being of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, to issues of education. And the thought was, if Indianapolis once again could become a very important center of agriculture, food and nutrition, health and medicine, sports, and fitness, education and culture, those five themes, with a focus on, once again, building a great downtown in the heart of the state capital, realizing that downtown Indianapolis is the one neighborhood that brings us together. It's the one neighborhood that belongs to every single Hoosier. And when people to any city, when you go anywhere in the world, your impression of the vitality and excitement is related to the impressions you have of the downtown. And once again, a commitment to build a great public university, which IUPUI now is, and then want to be sure that the kids who grew up here had the range of opportunities anywhere in the country. So the theme from the Lugar days to the endowment, and of course the endowment has enormous resources, really an incredible place. The family was so humble and so caring and so serving, and simply wanted to make a difference. And so the sports strategy, no more important than the cultural strategy or the education strategy or the commitment to kids, but it has become a very important vehicle to tell the world about Indianapolis and to bring extraordinary people here for a few days, and many of them have elected to stay. So that's sort of my perspective on the issue and where my opportunity to be a part of it came from.
Jim, that's incredible feedback. I'm curious from your perspective about, I know you were involved, and I think the endowment was involved in working to bring the NCAA headquarters from Kansas City to Indianapolis over 20 years ago. And I'm curious from your perspective, how big of an impact that work and accomplishment of that occurring from your perspective is to the city and to what we see happening today with the entire NCAA tournament being played in Indianapolis, unprecedented opportunity for the city.
Well, it's quite remarkable. I have no idea truly what the impact of the next 5 days in our city will be. To think that every game in the Division I men's basketball championship will be played in Indianapolis or at IU or Purdue. Actually, before the pandemic, they had plans for Division II to be in Evansville and Division III to be in Fort Wayne. And then we will host the Big Ten men and women, the Horizon League men and women, and the high school championship. I mean, this is just an overwhelming amount of activity, an enormous undertaking for the city and the state. There are a few places in the world that could do this. We can. But years ago, the NCAA, headquartered in Overland Park, Kansas, made a decision. Their lease was about up and they were going to relocate. Now, they weren't sure whether they would relocate somewhere in the area or somewhere else across the country. And they engaged one of the big accounting firms to do analysis of where their best opportunities would be. And sort of the key thing that we had going for us, we had already built a 20-year relationship with the NCAA. We hosted their Final Four in 1980 and made it a very different kind of event. And so we had developed friendship, partnerships with the folks that led the NCAA. They had confidence in our city, and there were great cities in our country that we competed with. But the fact of the matter is ultimately they chose Indianapolis, and we made a deal, a partnership. We asked them for nothing. We said, please come, we'll be a great friend and a great partner, and we know you will well. And the result of this is that they host about 3/4 of their meetings, conferences, board meetings here in Indianapolis. They bring their winter convention, which had never been in a cold weather city, to Indianapolis every several years. We have had more Final Fours than any city in America. We do a whole range of their championships. They have become extraordinary citizens, from Sid Dempsey and Mark Emmert across the enterprise. They are a part of the United, a part of the Boy Scouts, and they're a part of this community. And beyond, it provided economic opportunity for a lot of Indianapolis people to work in their institution. And I suspect every college president in the United States comes to Indianapolis once every 2 or 3 years. And the amount of attention and focus that they have brought on our city, their folks go to IU, PUI, they go to Butler, they go to Marion, they go to UND. This is just, it's been transformative as an ingredient, our city and state's reputation. And they're wonderful people. And, just hundreds of friendships have been developed and hundreds of opportunities for Indiana people to work there. I'm Jack Swarbrick, now the Notre Dame athletic director. Morgan Burke was the Purdue athletic director. So exciting stuff. And it's been, they've just been a perfect partner and more than we could have ever expected.
Yeah, Jim, I did a little research on and in writing my column this week, and I noted something that was said back in 1997 when Kansas City learned that they had lost the NCAA. Their local business journal wrote about it and said it doesn't have much. When they talked about the loss of the NCAA, the reporter said it really didn't have anything to do with money or incentives, as it did with civic enlightenment. And he noted that enlightened cities are rich in what a political scientist at Harvard called social capital, meaning it's people's involvement in civic affairs. So from their perspective, at least this reporter's perspective, he thought that the engagement by people like you and others, Jim, in the city's affairs and actually having a strategy and having everybody in Indianapolis buy into that strategy made a big difference in the NCAA deciding to move. And I think from my perspective, I think that social capital and people being willing from all walks of life to engage in these strategies like sports and other strategies in Indianapolis has made a big difference for our city. Maybe your thoughts on that civic engagement and why maybe that separates our city from others.
Well, I don't think, Nate, you could overstate the importance of that. The Pan American Games, 40,000 volunteers from every imaginable part of our city and state coming together in a common endeavor, being a part of the excitement of the event, getting acquainted with lots of their colleagues and people that they would work with maybe in a small way at the Pan Am Games, and then ultimately have a friendship or a relationship, either for civic or personal purposes going forward. The NCAA Final Four, hundreds, if not thousands of Indianapolis people will volunteer to be a part of this, to make it, and to give it some personality and to put the best face possible on our city. And, when somebody from afar says something about you or your community, it embellishes or enhances the pride we have in our community. And I said earlier, there are people that have moved to Indianapolis because of the sports strategy. Now, that's only a piece of it, but it's a piece of it that we've done very well. And there is no substitute for emotional engagement of people who live in a community to feel deeply a part of things, and to have a vested interest and to have a tie to the community. And it leads to children, families wanting to stay here. We want our kids close. Eli Lilly and Company needs to have the best scientists in the world to come and to stay, and like the sports strategy or the remarkable strength of Indianapolis for a city our size, as well as the health opportunities and the educational opportunities. These are these are things that bind together,
Right.
and it has worked.
Jim, was there an aha moment where you and others said, I think we might have found something that we can continue to ramp up in terms of an economic development strategy? And I'm thinking about, for example, the Pan Am Games back in the 80s. And was there a moment where leaders said, this is something that we can really continue to grow, or was it just a progression where you just kept going after that next big event or the next big thing like the NCAA headquarters opportunity? Or did the leaders at the time say, we found something, and we're able to bring our community together here in a different way than maybe a different strategy?
Well, that's a great question. I do think it was a progressive sort of thing. We hosted the sports festival for the Olympic Committee in 1982, and we beat out Philadelphia to do that. We hosted Pan American Games when Santiago, Chile, and Guayaquil, Ecuador, were not able to do that. I remember someone, a very important someone, who was working hard to bring the Olympic Games to the United States and to a very important city in our country. And he once said to me, he said, when we decided to go after the games, the only city in America that I was concerned about as a competitor was Indianapolis. Now, and then um, another time when a very, very important leader of one of the most important international sports organizations said, you know, Jim, had I known about Indianapolis when we moved from X, I would have never gone to Y. I would have come to Indianapolis. Um, and when we started to win competitions, to host Olympic trials, to host world championships, um, we had a very competitive reputation. So, um, and then the Pan American Games, a very big event, in some respects more of a challenge than the Olympic Games. Raising money to do it. It's its cohort is limited to this hemisphere, less TV coverage, but to take something that is that much of a challenge and do it in such extraordinary ways. Um, I had a heart problem a few years ago and was going through rehab, and I was working out on a treadmill, and there was a lady on the rowing machine, the floor in the same room, talking to one of her friends, and she said, you know, I was a nurse for the Pan American Games for the volleyball team in 1987. And she said, you know, that was just one of the most wonderful times for me and for our city and our state. And I just loved it. I just loved being a part of it. And so those were when we won the competition, when we would figure out how to bring 40,000 people together, how that nurse saw this as a pinnacle experience in her life. I was on the board of a significant company, and our CFO, who had been working for another insurance company in Wisconsin, said, you know, we kept coming to Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament. And finally we said, that's the place we want to live. And he moved his here to become the CFO of one of our 3 or 4 most important enterprises. So those were aha moments to me that this is working. And Indianapolis is a very different city today. I can remember when we had no hotels downtown and maybe 2 or 3 restaurants, and we've now hosted the Super Bowl. We're about to host the most extraordinary NCAA Final Four in history. Next year we'll have the college football champions. So you look at our facilities, our the sense of community ownership in this, and you then think about the multi-billion-dollar economic impact, and then you begin to think about the Speedway, and sort of Mark Miles, in many respects, got his start working through the leadership of the sports strategy. He's now the president of the Speedway. Roger Penske has made a major investment that will take that to the next level. And all of this has been done, sort of back to your earlier point, that in a way that it belongs to everyone. One of the great things about our facilities, the natatorium, which has hosted so many Olympic trials and so many Olympic champions, but if you and I wanted to go swimming there tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, it's open to us. And so this all comes together. The facilities are there for the elite competition for people from all over the world, but people from Indianapolis can go and enjoy it day in as students. from IUPU, Canada, et cetera.
Right.
So this has been something that brings us together, a unifier. It's a community building strategy.
Well, it is interesting that you say that, Jim, in that I think we all know that sports in and of itself can be a unifier, right? And just like when we watch the Olympics, we want our country to do well. And certainly we want our teams in Indianapolis. It makes a lot of sense that sports could be a rallying point for some of the reasons you mentioned. One of the things I'm always curious about is, with any strategy and any business plan, there are risks that have to be taken. And our city has taken our share of risk. In particular, I'm thinking about the risk that Mayor Hudnut, and I know you were involved in that effort to think about trying to lure an NFL team. This is, to me, it looks like that's some of the progression that we talked about. We're going after different opportunities. And one of them, I'm sure you were part of discussions about what it would mean to have an NFL franchise in our city, and what would that do for civic engagement. But it was not without risk that a decision was made to build a stadium in the hopes that we could lure a team here. And it'd be fun to hear from you. I know when we talked to you, IBJ talked to you about some of your experiences in the past, that you were involved and actually walked off the space near the convention center where the structure would be built. And I think you were at the endowment at the time, and I think the endowment was helpful and engaged in that effort. And I'm curious the risk piece of actually, saying, hey, we're actually gonna take a risk here and build something with not a guarantee that any NFL team is gonna choose us. What was that feeling like, and what were city leaders at the time thinking? What happens if we didn't land the Colts or another team?
Well, once again, it's a great question, and you could write a great novel, great book, fiction on that experience. You're correct. I did go down there one February Sunday afternoon and pasted off from the south side of the convention, the old convention building, to the railroad tracks to figure out whether or not we could fit it in there. It's sort of an unusual experience, but we had seen the indoor stadium in Syracuse, New York, and we understood the size, and we were sort of inspired by that to see if we could do it here. It was an enormous risk. We did, but we built the dome and some new ballrooms and exhibition space for a little more than $60 million. Today, I can't imagine what it would cost today to do that.
Right.
The Lilly Endowment, extraordinary leadership from Barney Hollett and Tom Lake and others, made a commitment to invest $25 million in this public space. And the Cranert Charitable Trust, because of, once again, a remarkable guy by the name of Don Earnhardt, we put $30 million into the project. So it was a public construction, a public asset that had 50% equity, unprecedented. And it was a place that seated 65,000 folks. We had been working very hard under the leadership of Bob Welch to bring an NFL team, an expansion team, to Indianapolis. And Bob had put together an investment group, good Hoosier people by and large, who wanted to bring an NFL team to Indianapolis. And he worked very hard to get this done. So in the meantime, the facility gets built. We schedule some college games. Notre Dame and Purdue played the first game. Indiana played some games there. The Circle City Classic brought Grambling and one of the other historically Black colleges to play the Circle City Classic every year. And it became coincidentally the most important facility in the United States for religious conventions. We had moved the headquarters of the Religious Conference Management Association to Indianapolis from Evanston, Illinois. And they had a wonderful man with Grover Hartman, a pastor who spent an awful lot of time bringing religious conventions here. So we had a place where the Presbyterians or the Catholics or whoever could meet, bring 65,000 people together for communion on Sunday morning, and to sort of validate, affirm the economic impact of this facility. It so happened that the Colts were looking for a new home, and Bob Irsay, we had worked with him, and he was very positive and optimistic and grateful. And he came to the Hoosier Dome and looked inside and saw that the seats in the building were blue and silver. And it was almost serendipity that seats had been the color of the seats with the Colts colors.
And that so that led your memory, Jim, that wasn't intentional.
No, that was not, no, sir.
Wow.
That was just why, that was just the color. And so I don't say that closed the deal, but we were able to make a good deal with Bob Irsay, and he wanted a new home. And he concluded that Indianapolis was a good place. The financial community, the business community made a good deal for everyone. And I do believe that the Colts were able to come and be enormously successful. And they were inspired to come because of the facility, but also the Speedway and the Pacers had already more or less defined Indianapolis as a big league city, a major league city. So the Colts come, and they've been, you sort of made this point, but everybody, Black, white, rich, poor, Republican, Democrat, whatever, whoever you are, you want the Colts to do well. You want the Pacers to do well. You want the Indians to do well. And the players, you could not overstate the impact that a Tamika Catchings or Reggie Miller or a Peyton Manning, a Billy Brooks have on children in our community. They uplift, they inspire kids. Indianapolis has a face with the rest of the world every Sunday afternoon during football season. And we won the Super Bowl. We hosted the Super Bowl. So the benefit to our reputation, to our ability to be competitive and attracting bright young people to want to come and live here, of bringing us together, of having something everyone wants to do well.
Right.
And we have the added advantage, Nate, of we had enormous discipline to build Bankers Life Fieldhouse, Victory Field, Lucas Oil Stadium, the Convention Center, the zoo, the IRT, the home for the symphony. And it's a long list, but to build it right downtown in the heart of the city, once again, where it belongs to everyone, whether you live in Plainfield, Greenfield, Greenwood, or Carmel, it's in the middle and it belongs to everyone. And That discipline, everybody wanted to build all of these facilities around 465, but we said no, we'll put it in the heart of our city. And a couple of years ago, USA Today said Indianapolis is the most important convention city in America. And the New York Times said Indianapolis is one of 52 places in the world that everybody ought to visit. So all this sort of fits together, and it's been fun for everybody in our city, I think. And life in part is about having fun and building community. But this has worked. This has been good.
Right. I know the sports corp continues to play such an important role. If I recall, we might have been the first city going back to the mid to late 80s. I don't recall the exact founding of the sports corp, but I think you were involved. And it feels like we might have been the first one to really put together such an organization. And then a lot of other cities may have followed suit. But can you talk a little bit about the importance of that organization and why it was formed and kind of what the history there is a little bit?
Yes, I can. Thank you. The Sports Corp was in 1979, incorporated in very early 1980. We held the Final Four in 1980, and there were other events, some international, that wanted to come our way, and we knew we needed an institution, organization, a structure to manage these events and to see that they were done as well as could be done. And so the Sports Corporation was founded. Sandy Knapp was the first executive director, brilliant, did a magnificent job. Ted Bohm was the first chair, and he's as bright as anybody in the state of Indiana. And to have this incredible talent with lots of people, with a Tom King and a Bill McGowan and a Michael Browning, but some of our best folks came together and put this in place. And the purpose of the Sports Corporation was to bring events to Indianapolis, to bring conventions and trade shows related to sports and fitness to Indiana and Indianapolis, to bring headquarters of sports-related organizations to our city, like the NCAA or the National High School Federation, or track and field, or gymnastics, or the American College of Sports Medicine. And equally important was to say we are going to be a city where opportunities for young people to participate in competition and fitness programs is going to be as good in the central city as it is in any one of the suburbs. And so that led to the White River State Park Games. That led to an effort to provide top-notch athletic equipment for kids across the state of Indiana. And so it had a several-pronged approach, and the rationale was as I've described, and I think we've done pretty well. Now, we were the first sports corporation in the United States, and today there are 400 of them.
Wow.
And so we've inspired our own competition, but this has been good for communities all across the country, and has been good for athletic competition and been very good for young people.
Now, thank you for that history. It seems the Sports Corp is still going as strong as ever. Obviously, incredibly engaged and involved with bringing tournaments here and opportunities like the Super Bowl and the Final Four and now the entire tournament. What a history that has been. I'm curious, Jim. I know we touched on it earlier, but it seems to me that the Lilly Endowment has been something very special to our state and certainly to our city, and continues to be that. That's something that not every city and state enjoys. A non-for-profit foundation started by a founding father of our city, Mr. Lilly, and it now has grown to, as my understanding, I think the second or third, maybe the first at this point. I think maybe the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation has them beat, but it's an enormous fund centered right here in Indianapolis. And I know most of its dollars continue to support organizations in our state and city. Maybe talk a little bit about just how important that has been, and particularly related to our strategies and economic development, like our sports strategy.
Well, the Lilly Endowment, and I was there for 16 years. I was president of the place for 6. So I just offer that disclosure. But the Lilly Endowment is remarkable. There are few foundations that of their stature and size that have remained faithful to what the family, the founders intended. I think Mr. Lilly persuaded his father and his brother in 1937 to set up the endowment, to set aside a significant piece of their own personal ownership in the company to create the Lilly Endowment, and to have it be there to serve the public good. And that they said we're going to be an endowment that is focused on strengthening religion in our and strengthening education and in building a great community. And some of their work is all over the country. The endowment is the largest supporter of historically Black colleges in the country. Probably the largest supporter of religion, never in an evangelical or proselytizing way, but trying to understand the history of religion and trying to find ways to improve and support pastors and to make religion, regardless of the denomination, strong. And then an enormous commitment to the state of Indiana. One of its great pieces of work was to help establish a community foundation in, I believe, all 92 counties in the state. But they've had a special commitment to their hometown, and they do it with great humility, with great integrity, and they have extraordinary people both serving on the board and very bright people serving on its staff. And they've, once again, back to this notion that great cities, you have to win the competition. And why will the best and the brightest come? At Eli Lilly and Company in the headquarters, there would be people speaking 58 languages. And so it's important that the best and the brightest folks from all over the world want to come here, whether it's for Lilly or Roche or One America, Rolls-Royce, Infosys, Salesforce, whatever the enterprise is, the IU School of Medicine. We want the best and the brightest to come. And they'll come and they can go anywhere in the world, by the way. I mean, you practice law in Moscow, right. We wanted you to come back and live in Indianapolis. And so the endowment has found ways to partner with a great partnership mentality with lots of institutions throughout the state to make education stronger, to make our cultural life stronger. They've been supportive of the sports strategy. Indianapolis is the smallest city in North America with a full-time symphony orchestra. That's important. Um, you know, they've helped build the children's choir. Um, we have 3,500 children in central Indiana singing in one manifestation or the other of the children's choir. And uh, so many of the things that have been good for our community, the endowment has been there in their own quiet, thoughtful, caring uh, way to make possible. And as you know, if you drove by the building, you do not see a sign on the building. This is a place that has never taken credit for or sought the limelight. The Lilly family simply, I think, wanted to make life better for as many people as it could, and to do it to be helpful, not for any self-serving reason. And it is a very substantial asset. And you're quite correct. There aren't many places in the that anything like it. But it's also inspired other families to to be focused on philanthropy. There was a time in Indianapolis that 120 companies were contributing between 2 and 5% of pre-tax profits for civic or charitable educational activities. And this formula that causes extraordinary things to happen requires civic leadership, leadership from the business community, from neighborhoods, from labor. It requires great institutions. One of the great things the Lilly Endowment has supported is the Center for Leadership Development. And that's made it possible for 50,000 African American high school students to be prepared to go to college over the last 40 years. And they've done that in partnership with Indiana University. But over time, most of the universities in the state have come together to be a part of that partnership. So this mentality of everybody doing a little bit, and both doing the best you can financially to be helpful, but to give your best intellect to the future of our city, and to always have a humanitarian perspective, a caring heart, to be sure that those that most at risk and vulnerable are a part of the opportunity. And these are challenging things to do, but the spirit of the Lilly Endowment has been a real factor in causing good things to happen in our city and state.
Jim, in terms of our strategies in the city of Indianapolis in particular, and economic development, there are sometimes some who would say, gosh, that the sports strategy has been fantastic. What's next? And I know you and I have had conversations in this regard, been part of conversations in this regard, but how do you think about all of your experiences, having been a leader in so many different areas, as well as been around the world in many different capacities? What do you think about our city strategies? What is there, a what's next, or how does the sports strategy that we've had play into how we think about growing our city in the future?
Well, Nate, I am not an expert on this subject. I care deeply about it, as you do. I do think the strategy of working on sports and fitness, health and medicine, agriculture, food, nutrition, food security, I think those are very important points of emphasis and opportunity. I think also that we've been blessed with IU and Purdue and Indiana State, Ball State, Rose-Hulman, and others, Butler. They've done a really good job of preparing young people for careers in high tech and IT, artificial intelligence, all sorts of things that I'm not um, that are a bit strange to me, I suppose. But there's a reason why Emphasis moved their North American headquarters here. There's a reason why Salesforce moved here, and they both bring enormously bright people, and there are a very significant number of startups. Both IU and Purdue have very significant research foundations and abilities to translate research, Bio Crossroads, 16 Tech, our ability to be a leader in the life sciences. So I think, we've been lucky in Indiana that our General Assembly has done a better job of supporting public higher education than the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Kentucky, and Ohio. And the investments, the investments in higher education are the critical piece of building infrastructure and institutions that prepare people bright for careers in technology. And I do think over time, so much of high tech has been on the two coasts, but you get an extraordinary young person who has good Midwestern values, that the cost of living in our part of the country is much more attractive than what it is on the coasts. And so our ability to, these investments in public higher education are so important, and full to governors and our General Assembly, both parties, for focusing on this. They come to a city here that is honest, and we have good government. We've had great mayors, good leadership, mayors and governors that get along. I think, we need to continue to build a great IUPUI. IU in Bloomington, Purdue in West Lafayette. When you look here just in Indianapolis, the story at Marion is unbelievable. Butler is almost the same. UND, extraordinary. Martin University, great new leadership. And then you put IUPUI in the middle of all of that. CTS is experiencing a rebirth. So a great cultural community, a community that is welcoming and inclusive. The International Center does such a good job of causing people that come from around the world to feel welcome here and to feel a part of things. And you have to give the IEDC high marks. They have found a way to tell the Indiana story around the world, and it's a great story. As my wife would say often, the Indiana story has the added advantage of being the truth. And so but our competition is working just as hard as we are every day.
Right.
We need to continue to produce bright young people, to have a commitment to public higher education, to have an attractive, exciting, dynamic downtown. my hope is that we have the most exciting, dynamic, prosperous downtown in the country, an upbeat, optimistic place, that we have, that we're a place that cares more about the well-being of its children. I want us to be the safest city in the United States. Um, so, and sort of to your earlier point, to be that place that everyone feels good about, feels a part of, finds their niche, and that we have more people engaged in civic life, and understanding what that means for the greater good, but what it means for each individual. You know, there's nothing more exciting in life than being a part of an unselfish group that share common cause and commitment to the common good and want to do something together. You know, the Hoosier Salon supporting Indiana artists, and all volunteer done. The same with the children's choir. So, you know, the cities after cities across this country have tried to do a Black Expo, and we've been able to do it for more than 50 years and hold it together. And all of this says something very special about Indianapolis and Indiana. Forgive my monologue.
No, it's fantastic, Jim. Let me maybe close with a tough question, because the question is maybe what's your proudest moment or accomplishment over the years as it pertains to our city and state, and sports or non-sports. You've been a part of such a big part of so many different efforts over the years, Jim. And I'm sure it's a tough question to answer because you've already highlighted a number of important aspects of our growth of our city over the years and state. But is there one that sticks out that you say, gosh, that moment or that accomplishment really propelled our city and state?
Well, I would say that there are lots of things. Forgive me, I'm going to give you three answers.
Okay.
IUPUI, now 40 years old. I remember the day the ground was broken for the campus on the near west side. And over that 40 years now, 260,000 college degrees have been awarded by IU and Purdue on the IUPUI campus. And, you know, that is extraordinary. And you look at the strength of the medical school, largest research budget in the state. IU now has 28% minority student enrollment. IUPUI is committed to being a majority minority institution. So the IUPUI story. Then the 40,000 volunteers for the Pan American Games, the way folks from our community can come together to do some great things. It just means the world to me. And there's always a great amount of Hoosier humility in the way we do things. And then the third point, I would emphasize, I am so proud of the Center for Leadership Development. I mentioned it earlier, but to think that Dennis Bland and Henry Bundles and Helen Baker and incredible people like Jerry Semler and Bob Bowen, Tom King, Steve Steidel, but they've made it possible in partnership with School of Business, Dean Otteson in the beginning, to prepare 50,000 minority students for a college experience to be successful, and then to have almost every college university in the state come in and offer scholarships for those young people. So the IUPUI experience, the Center for Leadership Development, the sports strategy, and I suppose, if you'll forgive me, but I love the children's choir. It was founded by Henry Leck, and he's just started it. This man and retired a year or two ago, but 3,500 kids singing together, and by the way, it doesn't make any difference who you are or where you come from when you come together to play football or basketball or come together to sing. And there are 100 great things about our city and our state I could talk about, but those mean a lot to me.
Jim, that's a great way to finish up our conversation. You highlighted some aspects that I don't think a lot of our folks would in town that we communicate with would have thought that would have been your answers. Those are fantastic, and maybe a little under the radar to some, and it's neat to see how many different elements need to come together to create a community, a sense of community, and you've been involved in so many of them over the years. And I just want to thank you, Jim, for taking an hour with us today, and for all your work over the years. It must be gratifying to see what's happening now in our city, about ready to happen with the NCAA tournament being hosted here in an unprecedented way.
Nate, I think you would agree that you always get more in return than you ever put into something. And the rewards have just been extraordinary. And the relationships and the partnership mentality. Just forgive me for adding on to your last question, but when I came back from the World Food Program, I inquired about, what's the hunger issue in Indianapolis? And they said, in the state of Indiana, 20% of our kids are food insecurity sometime during the course of the year. And, my hope was we could put our hand up and say, Indianapolis and Indiana don't have a single hungry child. And we were 40 million meals short. And we went to work with all sorts of partners, led by Dave Miner and the people at Gleaners and Second Helpings and the Midwest Food Bank and public education. And we got to a point where we could put our hand up and say, in Indianapolis, we don't have a single hungry child. And I can't imagine a better reputation. In the same vein, the governor's commitment to get the infant mortality rate down to be among the lowest in the country. So I would be remiss if I didn't include those two issues of that I feel really good about and feel are important.
No,
Bless you. Thanks for the leadership of the IBJ, doing an extraordinary job of telling the story and informing people about life in the business community, but helping people to understand what makes a great community, and knowing that you bring that spirit and that drive to cause it all to happen. So congratulations, and I thank you. John Burkhart, your founder many years ago, would be proud of you.
Oh, that's kind of you to say, Jim. And again, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and look forward to talking soon.
Bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.